Thank you. Appreciate that introduction. Neil was one of the best students I've had. In honor of, in honor of him, I shaved my otherwise thick black hair. No, although it did used to be thick and black. It's a treat to be here. It's a treat to be with the Georgia School of Preaching, to know more about the school. Obviously, my heart is in things like that, having been with what will always be, simply because of when I got there for so long, East Tennessee School of Preaching and Missions, and that is now Southeast Institute of Biblical Studies. They're outside of Knoxville and Clarence. It's good to be with you. I have been telling people, only to remind myself, that since I'm moving, I guess I can tell you now because they're going to announce it today. I'm moving to Bowling Green, Kentucky, and I'll be working there with the Lehman Avenue congregation. I'll be doing about 30 to 40% of the preaching. I'll be working with their Bible school, and they have a South Kentucky Bible Institute that I'll be director of, and I will be looking for ideas because I like the model very much that the Georgia School of Preaching has. So there we go. In this reinvention of myself, my little journal, I've started putting a lot of my lessons in here. This is the one for today. And I noticed that it's upside down. But it was too late. But you can't really tell that. If I hadn't told you, you wouldn't have said, "Hey, man, the thing's upside down. What's up with that?" Or I could say, "Well, I just like to read upside down." So anyway, this is my lesson, and my title is "When a Nation Departs from God: How America Went Wrong." And if you were around yesterday, sometimes what I do, and I don't do it to be provocative, because I don't believe in just senseless provocation. But I do believe in sensible provocation, and so hopefully this will be that. And I mentioned yesterday, hear me out. It's the lesson has a beginning and an end, and this is the beginning. So we're not there yet. There will be context to what I am about to say that I think will cause you not to want to lynch me, run me out of town on a rail, or similar things. Here we go. America is not God's country any more than any other country is God's country. We are, in a general sense, as every country is, one nation under God. But we are not in a unique sense. We're not Israel. We're not one nation under God. If you've checked the newspapers or listened to the TV or perhaps delved into that awful wasteland of Facebook that I found out many of you are in, and I certainly am. In fact, some of you asked to be my Facebook friends, and I just went on and said, okay. So we are not one nation under God. In fact, there are those who don't want us to have that in our nomenclature. And while I don't want to take away one nation under God, I really don't. If we do, in the broad, best, top way, we are one nation under God, as every nation is. God rules in the kingdom of men, and he appoints over it whom he will. Thank you very much. So, regardless of whether we have it on our dollar bills or something like that, or Congress has what is, for most of the folks there, an obligatory prayer, we're still Christians, and God still rules. And sometimes, well, not sometimes, light has a tendency to be brighter in darkness, does it not? And so I believe the great social experiment that we embarked on some time ago that's not going so well will eventually, to some extent, implode on itself. People cannot live against the nature that God gave to them. They cannot distort sexuality and find that to work very well. They cannot become amoral and have that work very well. I remember reading years ago Francis Schaeffer writing about a gentleman, a professor at a major university who had gone into postmodernism. And by the way, pre-modernism, modernism, postmodernism have always existed in philosophical form. One just tends to dominate over the other, so we've actually had postmodernists long ago. But he didn't feel like that there were any absolutes. He had children. Francis asked him, well, is it okay somebody comes into your house and cruelly ravages and kills your family? He said, well, no. He said, why? Maybe that's just how they're inclined. Maybe they just like killing people. They prefer that to being citizens who behave themselves. I read Facebook. A study has recently been released, and it was only a matter of time. In fact, it has been actually before, but now it'll get more attention. That, like supposedly, homosexuality is something you're just born with. So is pedophilia. That's just the way you are. And that it's not wrong to be that way. The person who wrote the article said, I'm that way myself. But he said, I don't practice it because I don't feel like it would be good to do that. That there need to be age limitations on sexual expression. But he did want to lower the age numbers. And if we think about it a little bit, if a person is born to be homosexual, why would they not be born to be any number of other things, supposedly? There are some people who apparently find it easier to rob than others. I don't really fight that temptation. You, I hope, don't either. I observe. I don't ask this question anymore because I'm not going to ask, has anybody here ever murdered anybody? Because I'm assuming if you have, you have repented of it and what have you. But most of us here have not, and nor have we been inclined. We might have wanted to damage someone about the head and shoulders, but not really kill them. So this whole thing of I just feel this way, the bathroom thing, which you know and I know is absurd. And eventually the absurdity of it, because it is so absurd and functionally unworkable, and things are going to happen and people are going to protest. People who were saying, well, yeah, that's what we ought to do. And I say, well, wait a minute. Let's rethink this a bit, shall we? All of that. So we are not in the sense of being God's special people, one nation under God. That we have never been one nation under God in the special sense of His special people. We have been more, quote, Christian, unquote, than most anybody else. And in many ways, ever. And that's a blessing. But how did America go wrong? I'm not as interested in how America went wrong. I mean, I'm interested. Don't get me wrong. I read about these things, and I one of my co-majors at Auburn was sociology, and so I'm interested. I'm even interested in a perverse sort of way in politics, though it's hard if you pay a price. But I know that there aren't really anthropological, sociological, political solutions to the problems that we have. Politics or the decisions that politicians make can mitigate against society just going nuts. And in fact, that's what God did with Israel, and that's what Paul explains in Galatians 3 when he says, you were under a tutor. It's a bad translation if you have tutor as the translation. It's a child conductor. It's a person who would take a child to school and bring them back. And nothing that survives in papyri that comments upon them is good. The children didn't like being forced to go to school. They didn't like being forced to do their homework by this person. And so, but they kept them in check because left to themselves, they would have turned out like me and graduated from high school at 20. And Greek parents had aspirations for their children to do better. Well, God hemmed Israel in with a lot of laws that kept them from going just absolutely crazy nuts like the pagans around them. Now, that said, they went nuts, and they were a difficult, stiff-necked, unruly, rebellious, idolatrous people. But compared to the people around them, they were at least a little better than that. And that allowed God to do some things with them that would have been much more difficult to do with other people. And it has been easy, oh, so easy, in our past to express our Christianity. Social institutions, not only have they not frowned on it, they have encouraged it. All kinds of statements have been made by presidents about how the nation will fare better if people study their Bibles and turn to God. Now, if you scratch a little bit deeper and find out what exactly they mean by that, it's very generic. And I preached a sermon that was titled, "They're a Member of the Church, You Know," because I kept hearing about people that were members of the church, especially in Nashville. It seemed like every country western person was a member of the church. They didn't live like that, necessarily. They didn't attend services with the church, necessarily. Most did not. But they're members of the church, you know. And it seemed like that we took some sort of pride in some mere institutional affiliation, as opposed to, and some folks in Nashville and other places, as opposed to actually living a committed Christian life. Those are the things that ought to captivate us, not the notoriety or how famous a person would be who claims to be a Christian, and we can document that they have been baptized for the remission of their sins, and they have worshiped without an instrument when they used to worship. That's not the main thing. We need people who exemplify Christ. And those are the ones that we need to say, this is what it looks like. Not just in what they do in places like this on Sunday, because that's not where most people see them, is it? But out and about in the neighborhood, all around the neighborhood, we need to let it shine. So that said, let me see if I've been sufficiently provocative as I want to. In God we trust. We don't. What do we trust in as a nation? Military. Okay, military is one thing. Israel didn't, when Israel trusted in their military to God didn't like that, did he? The military. Well, and as a secular nation, having a military, having people who can, Romans 13, kill you, comes in handy from time to time. But military is one. We are the most powerful military nation on the face of the earth. And in some fashion, that gives us comfort, but that ought not to be what we trust in. What else do we trust in? Money. Stock market goes down, what happens? It's louder than that, isn't it? So how the economy, you remember the famous statement of not terribly long ago, is the economy stupid? Well, no, it's not. Now, I like a good economy. I'll just assume that my vast investments do well. I do plan, hopefully, to work till I die, and I want to die really old while I'm still young. But that said, I like our economy. I have a thing on Facebook, Walmart musing, and I'm up to number 10. They go from the ridiculous to the sublime. I like Walmart. There's a lot of stuff in Walmart. Have you noticed that? In fact, if you can't get it at Walmart, Target, pardon the expression, Home Depot, and Lowe's, you really don't need it except for a car. So, that's pretty cool. I have lived places where you would have almost killed for a Walmart, but not quite. So we've got things handy, but we trust in the availability of stuff, the accumulation of stuff, the comfort and ease of life. We like that. I lived in St. Vincent for a summer. 80% of the people in St. Vincent were unemployed. They lived in huts. They didn't have indoor facilities. They were happy. Children, I never saw children sad. They were running around with practically nothing on, with no toys, having fun and laughing and everything. And over here, I observed that with abundance, I'm bored. I don't have anything to do. I'm old enough to where when I was a child, I never said I'm bored. There was a woods right beside the house, over toward the back, creek, crawfish, children, baseball, basketball, softball, every kind of ball. I didn't have time to do all the things I wanted to do. So our nation has, it's become soft. Let's just admit it. If you put us back in the Depression, a lot of us would really have a hard time. But the people who were forged in the Depression became the backbone of what became a very strong and prosperous nation. So part of our problem with our country is it's made life too easy for us. And as we're all, oh no, what in the world's going to happen now? As opposed to, let's think how we can capitalize on the situation in our country. Because as I observed yesterday, and I observe regularly, people cannot be happy living ways that God doesn't want them to live. They cannot. The distortions of sexuality that have become pervasive, I think, are illustrated by something that happened some years ago when Ellen DeGeneres and Anne Hesh were a couple of lesbians. Anybody remember that? Yes, you do. Is Anne Hesh a lesbian today? You may or may not keep up with Anne. I'm a close follower. Not really. Anne went hetero on us. Took a shine to men. Kept company with them. Famous, handsome Hollywood men, mind you. You're not supposed to be able to do that. The current social agenda says that if you thought you were homosexual and you decided that you weren't, that you were wrong. You were. There's a lot of propaganda about that goes on. What are we going to do about that? Are we ready? Are we prepared? I mean, the easy thing is, that's wrong. And then we just, okay, we're done. The Bible says so, quote a few verses. And it just keeps going. But there are unhappy people out there who are not fulfilled. They are not satisfied. And as our nation goes further and further away from principles that we could find in the Bible, it is an increasingly unhappy nation. There's a lot of angst out there. Anybody here drive a car? It's easier to get than Facebook users, but I know you're out there. Have you experienced the people cutting you off willy-nilly, like, hey, I have mastered the art of missing your car by 3 inches. It's okay, don't worry. Or the people who have taken advantage of the automotive industry giving you $100 off on your car if you don't get blinkers. Many people, realizing the economic advantage of that, have taken advantage of that. Maybe they subconsciously are trying to find the thing, but, oh, wait, that's right, I didn't get one of those. That's a symptom of something. When I started driving, everybody that turned on a blinker. Or, oh no, it goes back this far, stuck a hand out the window. That was scary. But folks don't care. I'm turning, thank you, and it's your job to just not hit me. People turn in front of us all the time. Like, if we kept going the same speed we were going, which is not particularly fast, boom! They assume, and rightly so, that we just as soon not do that. And so they take advantage of our kindness and are not wanting to have a crash and possibly hurt ourselves in our automobiles to brake and let them go ahead. Well, that's bad manners. People don't have many manners. That's a symptom of something. A lack of respect. An accentuation of what has always been true throughout the history of the world. It's about me. But society used to sort of, if you didn't behave yourself, folks would, or when I was a kid, they'd call your mama or your daddy and tell them that you were acting like a yahoo and you'd get a whipping. You might even get a whipping from your neighbor, or a whooping even. But we don't even talk about that anymore because it's brutal. And I realize that brutally punishing a child is absolutely wrong. There's no place for that. But the hickory, so-called, from the privet hedge had a play in it, that would make little red marks on your little legs with your little shorts on. It would sting. I remember running under beds and all, but it curbed your otherwise unacceptable behavior. My father tells the story. He was born in 1910 of the teacher would get people to go out and cut a branch for discipline's sake. And so my daddy was asked to go cut a branch, and he savored that. And so he found what he considered to be a really good whipping branch, only to find out, much in Haman-esque fashion, that it was for him. So I believe in laws, I believe in discipline, I believe in all that, but we've been able to take advantage of that. We've assumed it. And as it erodes, it's like we talk about the me generation, the entitlement generation, whining about things. We whine about that. Oh, I remember when. Why don't we do something about it? How do we engage people who cannot be happy that way? They can't. You look at folks who act in undisciplined manners, who are rude. Do they seem happy to you? No. They're not happy. You can't be happy that way. Christians, if we run around being disciplined and happy, perhaps someone might say, whoa, those people, though disciplined, are happy. I, doing what I want to do and undisciplined, am not happy. There are surviving letters from way back in the early days of Christianity that pagans noted that Christians, life just worked better for them. Their families were better. Their lives were better. things because they were living in keeping with how God made people. And of course it worked, because things work when you read the owner's manual and put it into practice. And what our nation needs to see is the light. We need to be a city set on a hill that cannot be hidden. And I think, as a whole, notable exceptions to this, we've grown soft, entitled. We expect the government to take care of all these things for us, make sure everybody honors God and everything. Let's give people a reason to honor God. Let's let them see that's the best way to go. So, how did the nation go bad? Well, money, trust in our armies, living wanton lifestyles, whatever we want to do, we can do it. And people got to where they thought they liked it. But the nation, before that happened, they were not members of the Lord's church in mass. They weren't out preaching the gospel of the New Testament in mass. And there were a lot of other things that, while a bit more subdued than current behaviors, were often not necessarily acceptable by God. So, that's the, let's kind of, okay, let me just go all the way with this. Our founding fathers. I appreciate our founding fathers, by the way. They're good guys. I'm reading listening to a book on Adams, and not Samuel, and John. There's John Quincy's kind of coming into the picture a little bit, but I read one on Truman, although not a founding father. I'm thinking about George Washington. And these guys were really special people. Thomas Jefferson was a deist. His New Testament was a lot thinner than yours. Because you know what he did? He took out the miracles, because those things don't happen. And Thomas Jefferson, in his New Testament, took out the things that Jesus said that he didn't think Jesus really said because they weren't worthy of Jesus. Thomas Jefferson critiquing Jesus. And were they more godly than your average politician today? Of course they were. Am I glad that they were? I am incredibly happy that they were. And our nation, we owe them a debt of gratitude, but we do not need to deify them. We do not need to create a mystique. They needed work. What I really appreciate about America in the early days, and by the way, the Pilgrims were very intolerant of people who didn't believe like they did. They left intolerance of being their religious belief to come over here and impose their religious belief on other people. So that's kind of how people do. But that said, this country had a time. The Restoration Movement. People who tried things like that in Europe got killed. It's amazing that we could have that. We've been able to express ourselves religiously, preach, publish. Alexander Campbell, although he doesn't get much attention in books about the history of Christianity in America, he should. He was a friend of presidents. He was a brilliant man. He wrote amazing things. And he had a tremendous influence. How many of you are familiar with a publication that he was a part of, the Millennial Harbinger? I remember something early in my life. A robin is a harbinger of spring. When the red robin comes bobbing along, it's just about springtime. Those robins don't do winter very well. Well, what Alexander Campbell thought, he was, by the way, having come out of the Presbyterian Church, a post-millennialist. And he believed that because of the success of the American Restoration Movement, that it was a harbinger of the fact that the world was going to go largely Christian and we would experience the millennium. where the world would largely be Christian, and hence the millennial harbinger. Well, it didn't. But the fact that he would think that shows that there was the opportunity to preach the gospel, to teach and live the gospel, without hindrance and with even encouragement. And we all tend to like to think of the good old days. I like to think of that. And honestly, I think I grew up one of the best times to grow up that it could have been. I was born in 1948. And I enjoy the fact that I've grown up in the time that I have. I've got to be part of some things that were unique in the history of the world. But no matter how good the good old days were, and they're never as good as we think they were, but no matter how good the good old days were, they're not today. And the only day the Bible recognizes is today. So it's okay to think fondly of yesterday. It's okay to look ahead and have some sense of trepidation that, but those things can captivate our minds. God wants us interested in right now. So, what does that mean? In Jeremiah 5, 30 to 31, let's just look there. And let's see kind of where we are. Because the next lesson is the positive one about what are we going to do about it. Jeremiah chapter 5, verses 30 and 31. And there's a few things there that in principle, this is the of God, we never have been, but this is the nation of God. This is how God wanted the nation to live back then. And you could say, I think in principle, that's the way He wants every nation to live, and that these things, when they go wrong, they intrude upon the integrity of a nation, they intrude upon the integrity of life in general, and what have you. We can modernize these things and give them application, and I think it will help us to understand when things go wrong, what's wrong? Well, here's one thing about when things go wrong, what's wrong? Last part of chapter 5. An appalling and horrible thing has happened in the land. The prophets prophesy falsely. The priests rule on their own authority. And my people love it so. What will you do at the end of it? In essence, religious/political authorities, because the priesthood was not just a religious office. They were responsible for the whole of the Torah being taught, which was also a civil document for the people. They were disseminating falsehood. Is that happening today in religion and politics? And in many cases, depending upon which politician you prefer, do not people love it so? Jerry Barber, when he conducts conflict resolution classes, asks a question. Why do you like the conflict you're in better than you like the solution? Think about that a minute. If they liked the solution better, they'd solve it, wouldn't they? Same thing with a lot of things. But people get to where they like being able to do what they can do. Autonomous self-freedom. Now, I may not like how this person over here expresses themselves with their freedom, but my word, I don't want them to take mine away from me. And as long as I've got mine and I can go out and get a lot of stuff and lead a relatively peaceful lifestyle and have a lot of discretionary time to do things that people in bygone days couldn't have even imagined doing, if you'll leave me alone enough to where I can enjoy that, I'll tolerate a certain amount of other stuff. I'll talk about it, but I won't really get serious about it because I'm enjoying things. I like it. So part of the problem is like when Constantine eventually issued an edict that not only legitimized Christianity, but eventually made it the state religion. And a Christianity which had been beleaguered by 10 persecuting emperors that killed thousands and thousands of Christians, and yet Christianity thrived with legitimacy, went soft, and became what we know as the Roman Catholic Church, patterned after, in many ways, the Roman political structure, with the Pope being Caesar. Prosperity was not good. Now, it can be. It ought to be. Solomon was blessed with amazing prosperity because he chose wisdom. And he could have used that with his wisdom. Oh my, he could have done some amazing things. But you know what he did? He became self-indulgent. In our country, Christianity was legitimized, very much so. And while not officially, because there's separation of church and state, though most people don't understand what in the world that's talking about, nevertheless, Christianity was the favored religion. If you were going to be successful in politics, you needed to say something nice about Christianity, whether you really believed it or not. And we took that for granted. I honestly think we did. And it would have been an amazing time. And we say, well, the 50s, we grew. We grew more than anybody else. Everybody grew in the 50s. We were just smaller than they were, so we had more people to grow and our percentages looked better. After the war, everybody got religious and everybody grew. We had a chance to really do some special, amazing, wonderful, wonderful, wonderful things. God handed it to us on a silver, maybe even a gold platter. And some things happened. Well, they were happening everywhere else with everybody else. But we could have risen to the occasion, and we could have done some marvelous things. Rex Turner, Sr., published a book, or actually published for him, lectureships and stuff, sermons he did. And back in the 1960s, he said, when we speak of church unity, it's like a clanging brass and a sounding cymbal. He said, and supposedly during our heyday, that he had identified 26 different divisions among us. I don't know how many we got now. Rather than taking advantage of wonderful and amazing opportunities when people were open to the gospel, we did an awful lot of infighting, turf wars. So what happened to America? Well, what happened to America is that people were people. They became people. They gradually degraded into what people degrade into if there isn't something bigger than that to keep them from doing it. While that was going on, Christianity had an opportunity to really affect that and not let it happen like that. In many ways, notable exceptions, we dropped the ball. But we can pick the ball back up again. And let me tell you something. If the church of the 1st and 2nd century could turn the world around in the conditions they lived under of oppression, imprisonment, and murder, man alive. In actual reality, God's still got that platter out there and saying, hey, go for it. Because nothing can trump the kingdom of God. And that was a subconscious pun using the word trump. I have skillfully taken the class down to time to be over, so no one will be rude to me about earlier comments. And thank you very much for listening.